Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we're following very, very closely with the what's been happening in the last 2 weeks before elections take place in Mexico. And a lot is taking place. I mean, there's been more candidates have been assassinated, threatened. There has been concern expressed by the Catholic Church on the viability as to whether elections can take place in some parts of Chiapas. There's been, if you all recall, last week we had Santiago Krill, who was the manager of the campaign manager for Xochitl Galvez, and they presented last week a risk map where it's quite shocking how much of the country is potentially where potentially elections may not take place for different reasons, despite what the National Electoral Institute has been assuring that they will be able to get the 170,000 sites open on elections day. And they're working very hard. As you know, elections in Mexico usually are, most of the people who work these elections are volunteers, are you and me, people who've been selected months ago and have received training. I do believe that the National Electoral Institute is going to try as hard as they can to make sure that elections take place in this country. But there are concerns out there. And in fact, there was a document that was published this week by a group that you all may recall. We've interviewed. It's one of its members, Enrique Cardenas, and they published a document kind of expressing some of these concerns. The name of this group is Signos Vitales, and the document is unfortunately it's very well done, fortunately, but unfortunately it is very concerning in terms of, what happened with this particular electoral process, even before elections took place on June 2nd. Joining us today, thank you so much, Enrique Cardenas is joining us today. He is the executive president of the Committee of Signos Vitales, which is an NGO that does these kind of reports. Welcome to the show, Enrique. And I remember one of the last times you and I spoke was related to a document that Signos Vitales published regarding money laundering in Mexico. And your organization raised very serious questions in terms of money that was coming from the United States, and raised a lot of red flags as to why such a large percentage of the money coming from the United States come from a certain part of the US, and it was arriving in parts of the country here in Mexico where you don't necessarily have very large migrant communities. So the issue of the movement of cash was something that your organization had been already raising. So this is also an issue that you raise and your organization raises in this report. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're joining us, Enrique Cardenas.
Well, thank you very much, Ana Maria. It's a pleasure to be here again. Well, yes, indeed. This report on the elections really has to do with all the complexities of the election, from legal issues to the weakening of the institutions, and then to, of course, the money issue, but also violence and crime and so on and so forth. So talking about money, yes, there has been, the amount of money in circulation has continued to grow. Has not just happened in the last couple of months, but it has happened in the last few years, where you find an increasing number of bills, 1,000 peso bills, which increased 340% in the last 3 years, from 2021 to the present, whereas 500 peso bills increase only 77%, 200 peso bills increase only 10%. So, and in terms of the absolute number, is 326 million bills of 1,000 pesos. And that implies that you and me and our families and children and old people, each one of the Mexicans that live in the country, 130 million, well, each each of us hold up 20,000 pesos permanently
Wow.
to make transactions.
No, but
And
wait.
that's on,
I mean, are you saying that, I mean, all this cash that is out in the economy right now, isn't that a reflection of all these social programs? Because many of these social programs basically are cash based. I mean, isn't this, or are we talking about something else?
well, it has to do, some of that has to do, of course, with social programs, but it's not the only thing. For instance, what we are looking at is an increasing smuggling of goods, and it's quite worrisome. Even the tax authority, the SAT, the tax authority,
Mhm.
they even mentioned that the diesel and gasoline markets in the country, 30% of those markets are underground.
Mhm.
Imagine 30% are underground. That means
Are they
that,
informal? They're not paying taxes. They're not being identified by the tax authorities or the Ministry of Economy. But what about the Bank of Mexico? The Bank of Mexico must know about the amount of money moving through these
well,
through.
these figures I'm telling you, they come from Banco de Mexico. And I am still shocked by the fact that they really haven't looked into that. And
Mhm.
neither them nor the National Banking Commission, they really haven't looked into those issues, which really surprises me a lot. But again, Ana Maria, this is only one factor in
Mhm.
in the whole of the issues related to the election process,
Mhm.
which are worrisome. There are many others.
Well, the name of the document or the report is Elections 2024 Illegality, Crime, Violence, and Inequity. So we talked about one of these issues. So one of the issues that you're concerned about has to do with the amount of cash that is floating in the economy right now. Now, how does this link to these other issues that you're concerned about?
Well, I think one has to mention, first of all, that there have been a number of situations by which both the electoral authority, that is the Instituto Nacional Electoral, as well as the tribunal, the electoral
Mhm.
tribunal,
Mhm.
they have had institutional problems, which may be, very difficult at some point. Let me mention a couple of them, but just as an example. Well,
Mhm.
first, the fact that in the tribunal there are only five members of the tribunal where there should be seven. It's not the
Mhm.
only electoral tribunal that is short in people, in the people that belong to it. In
Mhm.
all of the states, in the electoral bodies,
Mhm.
there are at least one. In all of them, they are not complete.
Mhm.
In all of them, they are not
Wow.
complete.
So, and that was basically a decision made or strategy made by this president that the tribunal, not only the national tribunals, but I guess the tribunals around the country would not have, would not appoint the replacement of the judges that were rotated out. So this was kind of a nationwide strategy to not
Mhm.
have sufficient judges. Now, how does that help? How does that help the president, or how does that help Morena?
Well, let me put it this way: that weakens the power of the judicial branch of the state, and it doesn't necessarily is helpful for one or the other, but they make them much more vulnerable. Imagine, one judge having to decide by himself or herself everything on a difficult situation in any state. They can be very
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, and
Right.
so the fact is more of a weakness of the system rather than it's going to be prone, to lean towards Morena or any other party. So
Uh-huh.
we are not saying that it's going to lean towards Morena. We're just saying is the election has these authorities which are weakened by the fact that these replacements were not done.
I mean,
And
the fact that the president made that decision that they would weaken these electoral tribunals around the country, and especially the National Tribunal. I mean, the only reason why he would do it, it's not because it would hurt him or his party. I mean, one should imagine that it was,
yeah,
you know what I mean? I know he's
yeah,
been talking about
yeah.
reforming these institutions, but by stopping the appointments nationwide, I mean, that is, we could talk about a constitutional crisis almost.
Eh, yes, that's correct. And if you add to that, for instance, the fact that within the National Institute, Electoral National Institute, the new head of the institute has had many difficulties in appointing the major positions at the institute.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the report how many of those major positions in the institute are really headed by people who have no experience, have no knowledge of the fields. For instance, in fiscalization, monitoring, or yes, I don't know exactly the word, but it would be like fiscalization. It's somebody who just doesn't have any idea, any experience on that, which is so terribly important.
It's oversight and supervision of
Right.
the monies in particular, trying to figure out that the parties and the candidates aren't spending more money than they should. In addition to the institutional weakness of the electoral authorities, what else should we be concerned about for these elections on June 2nd?
Well, if you ask me, in my personal view, of course, backed by this report, I would say that crime and the penetration of organized crime in the electoral process in many places in the country has become a major issue. It was an issue a few elections ago, I mean, 2 or 3 years ago. Now I think it's a major issue. What we saw in San Luis Potosí, what we saw in Michoacán in the local elections in Tamaulipas, where there were people, the operators of different parties were kidnapped for the full day. You know this. I mean, you're an expert on security and these issues.
In fact, Santiago Krill spoke specifically about gave those examples of what happened in Sinaloa, that where they literally kidnapped what they call operadores, the operators of the elections. They were kidnapped for days, and then they were released after the elections, and there was no criminal complaints, and the elections just, those were the results.
Well, that's it. And you have seen criminal groups going into towns and showing their strength, their social strength, so to speak, with the population. And of course, what they want is to get, to get as much control as they can on the territory. What we are seeing, as you know, also is that these criminal groups are interested not only on the head of the police, but also on the head of public works. So they are extracting the municipal budget as well.
Right.
So, and of course, they want somebody that will go along with them. So
yeah, well, and then that raises the issue of the inequality of this electoral process, because the president and the national government, state governments, have been actively involved in supporting that Morena and its allies, the candidates for Morena and its allies. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, there's just no question marks, and it just seems that there hasn't been enough questions in regards to the role, particularly President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador is playing in this election.
Well, yes, that's why one of the subtitles of the report is the the lack of illegality, well, the illegalities, and those illegalities go from, they have a very wide spectrum from, what he's not allowed to talk about the elections in the Mañanera. He shouldn't be talking and promoting certain candidates by himself in the Mañanera and so on. And he does it. And as you know, he has been denounced, and actually the National Institute has, I think, over 30 times said that there is a wrongdoing there, but still he continues to do it and so on. So that's one kind of illegality. But then the other, as you say, is the money that goes into social programs. The fact that, for instance, a lot of money was advanced for the older people, the senior citizens, the pension for the people. It was advanced back in March, I think, or February or March, 12,000 pesos, because they didn't want to do it close to the election. They didn't want to pay that close to the election. And apparently that has had an effect. So, yes, the whole machinery is really working towards a situation where this electoral process is not even.
Do you think there's enough evidence out there that would lead to the annulment of the election? I mean, because there's been a lot of complaints, and there is a lot of concerns in terms of what's going to be happening in some parts of the country in regards to violence.
Right.
But is there enough evidence?
I don't know. I wouldn't be able to say definitely whether there is enough or not enough evidence. But what I can tell you is that we haven't seen the whole thing yet. What I mean is that even on the day of the election, Ana Maria, I think we're going to see a lot of things. So it will depend on the results, the actual results, I think, on the one hand, and also on what happens on the actual day of the election. Before the election, we have all this evidence, but wait, we're going to get some more on the election day, just as you mentioned for the Sinaloa situation. And there is an emerging thing which worries me. Maybe, I don't know if it worries you too, which is this this issue of the apagones or the blackouts that we have been having lately. Well, we know that CFE hasn't invested as it should in terms of either both generation and distribution of energy. So there were, it's not unexpected that there will be blackouts. But the fact that, as you know, the fact that SENACE, which is this the entity that distributes and the electricity throughout the country, they can be very selective in terms of where
the blackouts take place.
Yeah, so if they can be very selective.
So if it favors one party or one candidate to have a blackout, there's going to be a blackout. Wow.
Well, let me tell you why. Excuse me, Ana Maria, but this is very close to me, because in Puebla, in 2018, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of that Sunday, in the election day, in Puebla for the state election, suddenly a number of armed groups appeared in some of the booths, the major booths, that were going to maybe decide the whole election. And they interrupted the electoral process. They even, shot on the air or whatever. So a lot of, many votes were lost by that. And of course they didn't want that particular site to be, fully voted, because they knew that it was prone to go for, in favor of one candidate. This is just an example which I am bringing from 2018. But when you look at this, at the whole map, and know that they can be very selective on simply having a blackout, that's really worrisome for the first time. I mean, anyway.
And they could do it in any part of the country. Wow. The name of the document is Elections 2024, Illegality, Crime, Violence, and Inequity. I will be posting it on the YouTube site, so you can have access to it. It's in Spanish, but eventually you all are going to be translating to English. So we will also I will also move it through our X account at Mexico Daily, and of course my personal account at AM Salazar. Enrique Cardenas, president of the Executive Committee of Signos Vitales. It's a really interesting document. It's a really good read. So congratulations. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. My pleasure as
always. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and I'll be right back.
Bueno.